In Skyrim, the werewolf beast form is a bit of a mixed bag. The lore and transformation is dramatic and impactful, but later in the game it ends up being severely underpowered and a bit one-dimensional. However, by fully understanding the mechanics of the beast form transformation, and by using a few great overhaul mods, we can add some nuance into a werewolf build that is both extremely powerful and fun to play at all levels. But before we get started, look, I'm going to be honest with you, this build is very overpowered to the point where you'll be running around one-shotting pretty much every enemy in the game. I wouldn't recommend playing this way for long, so this build guide is really better suited as an educational tool for identifying a few concepts that you can apply to your own play. So with that said, in this guide, we'll look at some key mods that I've installed to form a baseline framework to add some flavor to our werewolf build. Then we'll explore the mechanics of beast form to get a better understanding of what happens under the hood when you transform, and what does and doesn't carry over from human form. After that, we'll take a look at race and standing stone considerations, augmented by the Andromeda, Imperius, and Growl mods. Next, we'll take a look at some key perks in both the werewolf tree and the standard trees. We'll also take some time to talk about magic and shouts and how to make use of them with beast form for some fun wrinkles in the gameplay. And finally, I'll demonstrate some fun gameplay combos that you can try in your own game. And as always, I've timestamped all of these sections, so if you're looking for something specific, feel free to skip around. The Growl Werebeasts of Skyrim mod will serve as a basic overhaul of the beast form mechanics. I consider this more of a vanilla plus overhaul, as it doesn't do a ton to change the fundamentals of beast form, but instead mainly helps the form scale more viably at higher levels against tougher enemies, and to help flesh out an otherwise anemic werewolf perk tree. However, the bulk of the heavy lifting in this build will be handled by Ordinator, Perks of Skyrim. This is my perk overhaul of choice, and opens up a huge variety of gameplay options that are not possible without, many of which also apply in beast form. The last key mod we'll need for this build is Apocalypse, Magic of Skyrim. This provides the Okado's Recital spell, which is an autocast mechanic that also applies in beast form. It also offers much more variety in the selection of spells available to add some tasty gameplay frosting to your werewolf cake. While these are not quite key mods, I'll also make quick mention of Andromeda, Standing Stones of Skyrim, and Imperius, Races of Skyrim, to add a few more wrinkles to the build. While we are running the Growl overhaul mod, many of the beast form mechanics we'll be using also apply to vanilla werewolves. So, even if you are running an unmodded game, you should be able to benefit from some of this knowledge. So, there are some basic rules of beast form that should be noted when building around it. Technically, your race will be changed when you transform, so you'll lose any passive racial bonuses. This includes things like Breton's resistance to magic and Khajiit's buff to unarmed damage. All equipment will be stripped, with a few specific exceptions. So you'll lose any armor rating, weapon damage, and enchantment effects when you transform. All perks from the human form perk trees will still work after transformation as long as their conditions apply. There are several perks in Ordinator and in the vanilla perk trees that don't require things that are removed at transformation, and so help add strength and nuance in beast form. This will be a major part of our build strategy. Passive effects from Standing Stones will also carry over to beast form. As with perks, this is only if conditions are still met once everything is stripped. Any magical effects from spells, shouts, potions, and powers that are triggered before entering beast form will persist for their prescribed time limit after transformation in most cases. Since we're using the Growl Werebeast overhaul, we can take advantage of some new things that can help keep our furry form alive and feeding at all levels. Growl adds player-leveled scaling to armor rating and unarmed damage in beast form. It also advances armor and weapon skills with each feeding, keeping our human form's level progressing even as we spend most of our time in beast form. Finally, it does add in some race-specific passive bonuses to beast form that do add some form of racial identity, which was completely lacking from the vanilla game. So, while building around beast form, we'll be looking for human form perks without equipment-specific conditions and that synergize with abilities granted in beast form. We'll also be looking for ways to use magic in beast form through alternate triggers for spells, or by using spells, potions, or powers before entering beast form. Race is the base level of any build because it's the first choice you make when you start the game. Standing Stone is the next simplest decision, so I've decided to tack it on in this section as well. The Growl Werebeast overhaul mod adds in racial-specific bonuses in beast form. This is the main consideration in choosing race, since most racial bonuses do not carry over when you transform. However, some racial powers do carry over if they're triggered before transforming. With this in mind, I've chosen Bosmer as my race. The racial bonus Growl provides for the Wood Elves is a 10% boost to movement speed in beast form. At first glance, this may seem less useful than something like the Nord ability that grants a straight 20% bonus to attack damage, or the Khajiit ability that grants a reduction in stamina cost of power attacks. However, with a key human form perk we'll be looking at later, we'll be getting a buff to our unarmed power attacks with 2 times our movement speed boost. So, we'll be getting that 20% boost to attack damage anyway, along with a 10% boost to movement speed. With the Imperious Race Overhaul mod, Bosmer also get the Beast Tongue ability, giving you a permanent beast companion that doesn't take up a follower slot, and that will persist even in beast form. Even as a werewolf, the old adage holds true. The best defense is a good meat shield. Bosmer also get to eat dead people, so you get to keep the whole corpse munching theme through any form in your playthrough, if you're into that kind of thing. Following the speed boost logic, with the Andromeda mod, the Shadow Stone grants a 20% movement speed boost in combat. That will be another whopping 40% added to power attack damage in beast form. These stacking buffs to movement speed also provide a defensive option that becomes much more important once you transform, since you'll no longer have access to blocking, wards, or dodge rolls. And now you can start to see just how overpowered this build will become. Other good Standing Stone choices are any that provide a saving roll of sorts. Specifically the Apprentice Stone that once per day vaporizes an enemy that is about to land a killing blow, and the Lover Stone, which will fully revive you after losing all health once every 15 minutes. You know, just in case you wanted to add extra lives to Skyrim. Now we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the build, the perks. Let's start with the Werewolf tree since it's much simpler. With how strong beast form is with this build, you'll be killing and feeding at a high rate, and so you'll get this tree completely filled out pretty quickly. But there are a few perks to focus on first that will help keep you alive while you level up. First of all, start with only one perk in Bestial Strength. We'll be boosting our attack damage in other ways using the human form perk tree, so this is less important at the very beginning. From there, you'll want to take Animal Vigor because you'll still take a large amount of damage early in the game. 100 points to health will help a lot at this point. Next, you'll want to focus on Gorging and Savage Feeding, which will provide more health per feeding and allow you to feed on more types of corpses. The more often you feed, the more healing you'll get, and the more quickly you'll obtain perk points to spend in this form. Once the feeding perks are taken, you'll want to refocus on Bestial Strength to fortify your damage output. From there, the other perks are less impactful, so feel free to take whatever ones look interesting to you in the moment. Before we move on, I want to discuss the top level perks in the tree. These 3 Ultimate Werewolf perks augment the Howl powers that you unlock after the Companion's questline. You're given the Totem of Terror Howl by default, so you may want to focus on those first. Getting your enemies to run away instantly can be very useful when you feel like you're about to be overwhelmed. To gain access to the other Howl abilities, you'll need to do more jobs for Vilcus, Farkas, and Ayla after the Companion's questline is complete. Eventually, Ayla will have a special mission for you and will accompany you to search for a werewolf totem that grants one of these Howl abilities. Once the totem is obtained, simply activate it in the Underforge to switch to its ability. Note that you'll also be given the ability to choose Werebear or Werewolf form here, a nice addition by the Growl mod. The differences here are purely cosmetic though, so feel free to pick whichever. The Totem of Fear can be upgraded in the top level of the perk tree to affect even dragons, resulting in a similar effect to the Dragon Rend Shout, only it's an area of effect power centered on the player, so you have to be pretty close to the dragon to use it. The Totem of the Hunt Howl provides a Detect Life effect and can be upgraded to blast open locks up to Expert difficulty. This is fairly useless in my opinion since I have Predator Vision installed and it provides a similar effect for free when you become a werewolf anyway. As for the locks, I find looting works better in human form anyway, so I found myself reverting form before checking chests and bodies anyway. The Totem of Ice Brothers was by far my favorite though. It summons 3 spectral wolves to your side when you howl, and can be upgraded to werewolves with these perks. Again, having allies to distract your enemies can be the most effective defensive tactic in this game, and this provides some very powerful ones. And by the way, this does not count against the limit for conjured minions. Interesting. While the goal of this build is to spend as much time as possible in beast form, there are many perks in the regular human trees that make a huge difference in beast form. In fact, I'd say some of these are actually more impactful than any of the werewolf perks. Now that we know that all perks work in beast form as long as the conditions are met, we can look for perks that don't have conditions that can't be met. There are lots, but I want to point out a few key ones and build off of those. First and foremost, we need to look at the light armor tree. Most perks in this tree require a full set of light armor to be equipped in order to be effective. However, the unarmed subtree does not. So, we can gain all the benefits of these perks in beast form where we will have no armor and no weapons. This is the secret to the power of this build. Iron Fist gives you a damage boost based on current stamina levels and gives you experience in light armor when you use unarmed attacks. This synergizes well in beast form because with the Growl overhaul mod, it converts your entire magicka pool into stamina when you transform, which means more stamina in beast form, which means more attack damage in beast form. Take all 3 ranks of this perk as soon as possible. Sweeping Wind is the next perk and the key ingredient for a seriously overpowered werewolf build. This will turn your claws into a giant blender that shreds absolutely every enemy in the game almost instantly. With this perk, unarmed power attacks get a 25% damage boost, plus an extra 2% for every 1% your movement speed is currently boosted. So far, our speed is already getting boosted 10% for being a Bosmer werewolf, and 20% with the Shadow Stone. That translates to 20 and 40% power attack damage boosts that stack, so far. The next big game wrecker perk is Rushing Tide. This perk gives you 8 seconds of increased stamina regen and another 5% of boosted movement speed. And this stacks. That's another 10% of power attack damage per attack that you've landed in the last 8 seconds, on top of the stacking 20% and 40% buff we're already getting from the previous perks. Okay, this is getting a little ridiculous. There are 2 other perks in this subtree that warrant an honorable mention, but are nowhere near as impactful as the previous ones. Those are just so ridiculously powerful that these are completely overshadowed in the grand scheme of the build. But they can introduce some nuance into a very straightforward playstyle, so let's talk about them. Breaking Waves gives a small chance to land a critical hit with a massive damage boost. Unnecessary, but a really nice boost regardless, so it's worth taking. Hissing Dragon is much more interesting, however. It produces a shockwave from unarmed attacks that inflict the chosen elemental damage type. You can pick only one of several elemental types. Since the vast majority of your damage output will come from your physical attacks, feel free to pick whatever element appeals to you, or fits with the chosen theme for your character. But if you choose Fire, Frost, or Shock, these shockwaves can benefit from certain perks in the Destruction tree. Because of this, I chose Frost, as there were some interesting synergies and combinations in the Destruction tree that could reduce frost resistance of enemies. With that, let's move right into the Destruction tree. The perks that affect Hissing Dragon are the ones that don't specifically mention spells, but instead include elemental effects in the description. Namely, Combustion for fire effects, which does more damage based on the target's missing health, Ionized Path for shock effects, which does more damage based on the target's missing magicka, and Merciless Cold for frost effects, which does extra damage based on the target's missing stamina. Higher up in the perk tree, you can take Exhaust, which drains stamina faster when using frost effects, and Show Them All, which drains magicka faster with shock effects. World in Flames, the fire version of these perks, requires directly cast spells as a prerequisite, so that isn't totally feasible here. There are a few other perks in the Destruction tree that modify elemental effects, but they require dual casting to access, so those aren't useful for this build either. Elemental specialization is worth taking since you can only choose one element with Hissing Dragon. Pick the same element here to strengthen those shockwaves further. Beyond the Hissing Dragon shockwave effects, the Ordinator and Apocalypse mods do provide other ways to trigger spells besides directly casting them. We'll get into this later, but this means that other perks in this tree are worth taking, as long as they don't require dual casting or holding spells in your hands. So, taking the Destruction Mastery perks and Robe of the Magi are very worth the damage boost. And many elemental specialty spells can absolutely be worth taking. For my playthrough, from the Frost subtree, I took Shatter, which reduces frost resistance by stacking 25% for 10 seconds when a resistant enemy is hit with a frost spell. If you have a Frost Cloak active, all resistant enemies in a small radius will be affected by this. This helps mitigate the major weakness of frost magic, that so many enemies in Skyrim are resistant to it. Before we move on, you'll also want to take the dual casting perk here. It'll be necessary for the Spellscribe mechanic that we'll be talking about later. For now, just go ahead and take it, cause you'll need it later. Next, we'll look at the Restoration tree. There are a good amount of perks here that offer permanent passive abilities that do persist into beast form. Hallowed Burial provides up to 30% more attack damage against the undead, and applies to beast form. With large infestations of Draugr and vampires all over Skyrim, this is well worth a perk point or two. You'll also want to take Warrior's Flame and the rest of that subtree except for Apotheosis, which gives you a power that we won't have access to in beast form. This subtree heals and buffs allies in the player character, and also nerfs and harms enemies. These perks all work in beast form and make for no-brainer ways to spend your perks. Later on, we'll be talking about how to use the Okado's Recital spell from Apocalypse to auto-cast spells when entering combat. You'll be able to hook up Tree Rings, a delayed healing spell which will benefit from the Restoration Mastery perks, as well as the Respite perk, which will also restore stamina by the same amount. This will keep your stamina levels high, which now leads to more powerful unarmed attacks with the Iron Fist perks, and more frequent overpowered power attacks. Next is the Alteration tree, which also provides a few very nice permanent passive abilities that also persist into beast form. You'll want to take all perks in the Alter Self subtree. Starting with resistances, I took Resistance to Frost and Flame to bolster defense against dragons. For attributes, I chose Stamina to boost unarmed damage from the Iron Fist perks, and to have more power attacks available to shred foes with. Nullifier is a great passive effect that also synergizes well with the Frost perks we've taken. It stops nearby enemies from regenerating stamina and magicka. Since the damage of our frost spells and attacks now scale with missing stamina, this will greatly strengthen our frostiness. You'll also want to take the Mage Armor perks. Later on, we'll be discussing how to autocast Ebony Flesh when entering combat in beast form, and since our armor is stripped when we transform, we'll be able to take advantage of the boosted armor rating provided by this perk. Grab all 3 ranks as soon as you can. Another great perk for our overpowered speed plus unarmed synergy is Wellok's Dormant Arcana. This allows you to choose a spell type and then an added effect to tack on to all spells cast of that type. I chose armor spell types since Ebony Flesh was a steadfast mainstay in my Okado's Recital stack, and attached the speed effect to it. This provides an added 5% bonus to movement speed whenever an armor spell is cast, which gives us another 10% damage boost to our power attacks, stacked on top of our already towering speed boost stacks. Yikes. The next key perk that adds a great little twist to our beast form build comes from the Enchanting tree. Yes, when we transform, we do lose all of our great enchanted gear. But we'll be focused on the Spell Scribe perk here, which triggers a stored spell whenever you power attack once the cooldown timer is expired. Take this perk and the Power Echoes perk, which allows you to proc this twice per cooldown period. The next tree is a bit of an optional one. Conjured minions will persist for their allotted time period even after transformation. So, if you want to go this route, you'll want to take a few key perks in the Conjuration tree, namely the Conjuration Mastery perks to get your minions to last longer. You might also consider March of Oblivion, which grants extra minions based on Magicka pools. This is a bit at odds with this build since generally you want to invest heavily in the Stamina attribute, which translates directly into damage output with the Iron Fist perks. Still, this can be a fun option if your base class is a mage that uses Beast Form as a backup transformation for when you run out of Magicka and need to turn the tides. Worth a brief mention is Alchemy. Beneficial effects from potions you take before transforming will persist into Beast Form for the remainder of their allotted time period. Potions that boost stamina pools and regeneration, health pools and regeneration, and destruction damage are all awesome candidates for this tactic. However, Beast Form will likely last far longer than these potions will, so you'll get diminishing returns on your perk investments here, so just keep that in mind. Any perk here that strengthens beneficial potions is well worth taking if you have extra perks burning a hole in your pocket. Magic and shouts are normally a huge part of adding nuance to gameplay in Skyrim builds. However, these aren't normally available in Beast Form. Spells can't be cast directly because you're locked into claw attacks in both hands, and the shout button is replaced by the Werewolf exclusive howl abilities. However, there are a few ways to work around these limitations, namely, spells and shouts can be activated before transforming, and they'll persist for their normal duration after transformation. This works in the vanilla game as well. Some spells can be hooked up to the Okado's Recital spell from the Apocalypse Magic of Skyrim mod. These stored spells will be triggered automatically whenever you enter combat. And finally, the Spell Scribe perk in the Enchanting tree grants you a power that allows you to store a spell that you're currently dual cast charging. This stored spell will then be triggered whenever you power attack, limited by a cooldown timer that scales with your enchanting level. For maximum variety in gameplay, I suggest making use of all three of these techniques. Before entering a hostile area, summon any minions you want to follow you, activate any shout you'd like to take advantage of, and chug any potion that you have to buff your character. Then, trigger your Beast Form transformation and enter the fray. This will trigger any spells you had stored in Okado's Recital. You'll be able to obliterate anything in melee range, but for flying or distant enemies, put them in the center of your screen, and perform a power attack to launch your stored Spell Scribe spell at them. Quite a lot going on for a playstyle that was once limited to just running around swiping at enemies, huh? Yeah, I thought you'd like that. Good shout candidates are those that provide buffs over extended periods of time. Namely, I like Dragon Aspect, which can only be used once per day but is extremely powerful, and the Slow Time Shout, which, well, slows time. I'm sure this arsenal is expanded with the Thunderchild mod, but that would likely require a whole video of its own, so I'm leaving that to you to explore for now. I've provided pretty straightforward examples with the destruction synergies explained earlier in the guide, but with more spell pack mods and the fact that you can expand these spell triggers to spells in all schools, the sky is the limit for creative combos here. Experiment on your own, find some broken stuff, and then please let me know about it in the comments below, because I live for this kind of stuff and I'd love to see what else you guys are coming up with. And now for my favorite part of all builds, the gameplay combos. In Elder Scrolls lore, the Wild Hunt of the Bosmer is a phenomenon described as a flood of horrific beasts blind in fury, and a pack of shifting forest demons and animal gods, thousands strong, which sweeps through the countryside killing everything in its path. Now that is chill-inducing. Well, what if I told you can do that in-game? Well, kinda. For this combo, you'll need to make sure your Totem of Ice Brothers is active. Before entering a hostile area, activate your Beast Tongue power and cross your fingers that you get something badass. You might get a snow bear or you might get a fox, but the Wild Hunt does not discriminate whilst imparting its natural fury. Feel free to seek out a suitable predator first before activating the power. Next, conjure as many familiars as you can, given your conjuration skill and perk investment. Or you can simply cast the Wolf Pack spell from the Forgotten Magic Redone mod demonstrated here. Finally, transform with your beast form power and activate your Howl ability to spawn in 3 more spectral werewolves to join in on your hunt. Now you're ready to lay waste to all of nature's enemies, or just indiscriminately due to this immutable power trip. Next up is the Harbinger of Ice. This combo is the overwhelming cold of Skyrim personified. Even the hardiest of Nords will fail to resist this violent blizzard of ice and claw. You'll want to start by adding Frostcloak to your Okado's Recital stack, and then hooking up Ice Storm to Spellscribe. This will automatically cast Frostcloak when entering combat, and Ice Storm when power attacking. Ice Storm is a powerful destruction spell that has the added benefit of cutting through enemies, potentially hitting many in a crowd. Before entering a hostile area, drink the strongest potion of Fortify Destruction that you have, and enter Beast form. Now, as you enter combat, a Frostcloak will be cast, boosted by your Fortification potion, and every time you perform a power attack, a devastating Ice Storm will cut through all enemies in front of you, doing health and stamina damage as it goes. The combination of the Shatter and Winter's Majesty perks, along with the combination of Ice Storm and Frostcloak, will keep enemies' frost resistance and stamina levels low, which means more damage.
Entire armies shall cower in fear as you usher in a new Ice Age.
And that does it for another build guide. I tried hard this time to explore some very untrodden ground and find a very powerful build that few have shared, at least in my research. So I really hope you enjoyed it and that it proves educational and useful for your own future playthroughs. I welcome all feedback. This includes constructive criticism, so if I've missed something or gotten something wrong, please let me know in the comments below so we can get the right info out there. Finally, if you did enjoy this video or found it useful, please do like and subscribe for more build guides, modding tips, and legendary permadeath live streams. Hope to see you around.